on the Joe Budden show, he openly talked about Max Kellerman and how their partnership was over in his eyes. Take a listen.
What do you say to the people?
And we reacted to Stephen A last week, but there was way more in that clip that actually was juicier than what I was talking about with Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless, and this is it.
Say they saw the tension between you and Max developing on air before his departure from the show. Did you hear any of that?
I heard some of it. I would take full responsibility for that. That's totally my fault.
Okay.
And the reason why it was my fault because I didn't like working with him, man. It's just that damn simple. I didn't like it. I thought the show was stale. I thought that we had flatlined when it came to the public at large. And I'm trying to win. I mean, I didn't want to go from number one to number two when Skip left. That's not what I wasn't having that. That shit was not going to happen.
Did anything in the numbers say that you might have been headed that way?
No, but to me it did.
Creatively?
To me it did, not just creatively, but the consistency of the number.
Got it.
In other words, it wasn't going this way.
Yeah.
It was just there. And so that's what I was feeling. And it was like, listen, I had mad respect from him from the standpoint that white dude, highly intelligent, Ivy League educated from Columbia, smart as a whip, can talk his ass off, can talk about anything. And I get all of that. But you weren't an athlete and you weren't a journalist. And the absence of the two components left people wondering, why should we listen to you? Okay, well, you might have had that figured out on Sports Nation, or you might have had that figured out on another show. But on this show, if you looked at the content emanating in the social stratosphere, meaning YouTube and other components that you use to measure one's cachet, Q ratings, focus groups, all of these different things, it was like I was damn near doing the show by myself because we were oceans apart in terms of cachet. Well, how are you oceans apart from me if you sitting right across from me 5 days a week for the whole 2 hours? Because one of us is resonating and one of us is not in that platform. And so for me, I was like, look, this is what it is. And we had a number of conversations, one-on-one, many, many times. I know this audience. I know what they're looking for. I know what they need, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, you're going to do what you need to do or you don't. And if you don't do what you need to do, I'm going to get somebody who will.
There is a lot to unpack there. Let's start.
And we may listen to what Buddy's talking about here, but I wanna dissect for myself what he was saying, because honestly, this is a misstep to me. Yeah, that's a misstep to me. That's arrogance. That's ego speaking. That's him being on his high horse about the entirety of the situation. And what I think is extremely interesting, if I remember correctly, when Max left or was kicked off the show, because he goes into how Max was kicked off the show in that same segment. He says that, he went to the head honchos and said he's got to go. He said he's got to go. Now, I don't want him to not have a job, and this is what Stephen A is saying. I don't want him to not have a job, and if he's not going to have a job, then he doesn't have to go anywhere, but he's got to go. Essentially, he's got to go. But this is around the time when he left, Max left because Stephen A kicked him off, and Shannon Sharp started to ascend. And Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp were on an upswing at a time in which I thought they overtook First Take. Because I don't think that they found anybody to really replace Max. The only, and from the public's perspective, at least the spheres that I'm in, First Take got noticeably worse, right? They added like Kendrick Perkins of the world. They added the Ryan Hollins of the world, the Mad Dogs of the world. They added a bunch of subpar athletes and subpar journalists to the conversations and tasked them with saying just the most hyperbolic and ludicrous stuff on the show, and that's the way they gained any sort of traction or motion or noise in the streets, as we'll say. But for Stephen A. and Shannon Sharp, although Shannon was doing ridiculous stuff on his end, he still produced cool shit. They still produced cool shit. They were in the zeitgeist. They had people talking. It was a good show, good flow, all that stuff. Now, what Stephen A. won't talk about is during that time, Max was extremely challenging of Stephen A. Smith. Max was extremely challenging of Stephen A. Smith. Specifically, if I'm not mistaken, this was during like the whole Black Lives Matter segment, you know, of that time period. He was getting smoked. That nigga was getting smoked. And after that, it was nasty. It was nasty. And to say that Stephen A. to say that Max had no journalism experience is cap, because the little research I've done, Max has been doing this for a long time. But around this time with the Colin Kaepernick stuff, and you got T.O. on here who they know they have personal beef, when people were saying stuff like this,
I'm in the streets. Max almost seems blacker than you, Stephen A. with what he's coming, with his commentary.
Look at Max shaking his head. Yeah, that nigga is nasty. That nigga is nasty, bruh.
With he's coming, with his commentary.
With all due respect, my brother.
I'm just saying, dog.
Wait a minute. Wait to finish.
I'm just saying.
I'm going to check you right now. You don't cross the line.
I'm just saying.
Time. Wait a minute. You don't cross the line.
I'm in the streets.
But I will say this. During a lot of those BLM conversations, the Kyrie Irving conversations, the more hard-hitting conversations, Stephen A was getting cooked. Stephen A was legitimately getting cooked. There were weed conversations. There were conversations about the riots and the protests and all these things like this. I'll play this one, and I know this one. It won't end up on the
support protests. We are protesters. We got a lot to protest about. But when you riot, particularly in your own community, in the past I'm talking about, why is that something that we've lamented? Because when the fire stops burning and the damage has been done, and you've done it in your own community, where do you go from there? The Detroit riots, for example, in 1967, they still have never fully recovered from that, how they ravaged their own community at that particular moment in time. I only bring that up to say this. In this regard, and I only bring that up to say this. In this regard, when you're looking at the NBA, you're not talking about the players. You're talking about the collateral effect that it has on people.
I'm trying to be as like transformative of the content as possible, so I can upload this clip without being claimed. And Stephen A. Smith is on what a lot of people would say is the wrong side, the tone deaf side, or the lack of understanding side in this protesting conversation. At this time, SportsCenter, basketball, all these things were getting extremely political. And Stephen A. found himself on the wrong side of the aisle, and Max was on the right side. And not just on the right side as like a panderer, not just on the right side as a I'm just saying things, but he was on the right side and was eloquently speaking his mind and his peace and his truth. These were his words.
People the sport employs, on people in local economies who feed off of that. The fact is, just something like that, canceling the NBA season, it's not just going to affect the players. It's going to affect thousands upon thousands of people, millions, if not billions of dollars of economies. And that's going to have a ripple effect. You can't ignore that because that's going to affect us.
Obviously,
that's not about games.
It's better not to riot. I'm not pro-riot, okay? Let me be very clear about that off the top.
I'm not saying that. I just brought that up.
Rioting in their own communities, black people don't own those communities. They don't own those communities, and this culture has been rioting against black people for hundreds of years now.
That wasn't my point,
So
though.
it's just interesting But they're not. The property they're destroying is not their own, even, in fact. I'm not. So that's why I said it's not like the idea that, well, this is counterproductive. It may be in certain ways. It is in certain ways. Not maybe. I don't want to. It is in certain ways, and it's it's better not to riot. However, it's not in all the ways that's presented in the media.
Yeah, Max used to be smoking him. Max used to be really, really, really cooking Stephen A. And it just seemed like a hater tactic. I don't think that for the large part people had issue with what Max was ever saying. It never looked like Max was a hater or people didn't like him or whatever the case may be. Yeah, this just so happened to be a one-sided feud. And I guess at the time, Kaepernick was going crazy, and he was just caught on the wrong side. I just think he was hating. I don't want to drag this. And if he felt that way, That's fine. At the end of the day, I think he's winning/won because he's ended up with Shannon Sharp as opposed to, whoever. But to talk about his journalism acumen, to talk about the journalism acumen of Max is crazy. To talk about him not being able to match and him not bringing excitement is crazy. When you had Ryan Hollins on there, when you had Will Kane on there, when you had some of these other clowns on there, when you got Mad Dog Russo on there, like that's crazy to me. To me, that's crazy. And to say that there was literally nothing wrong with the show, come on, dog. You got rid of him for no reason other than you were getting outclassed. You were getting outclassed. And with more information and context, we are figuring out that it has nothing, like Skip Bayless had nothing to do with Steve or with Shannon Sharp being off the show. That was the networks, and that was the other people. That was the networks and the other people. That had nothing to do with Skip Bayless. Nasty ass nigga.